We have a 2005 Audi A6 3.2 liter, and this thing has a problem with the noisy timing chain tensioners. Our noise is coming from bank number 2, the left side, but we're gonna take both valve covers off and both timing chain covers off and inspect the tensioners. Okay, so take the covers off. They mounted on a little rubber grommets with a little ball head bolts. Don't break them. We're gonna take the coolant tank out. You gotta take the screw out of the coolant tank, flip it upwards, and take it out. Oh, this one's disconnected already. You have a electrical connection going to the fuel coolant tank, so disconnect that as well. We're gonna take the air box out. Unclip the fuel lines off the air box. Should have another clip on this tab over here. This one's missing, so just unclip that, whatever you got. Loosen the clamps on the intake hose. Take the intake off. Take the vacuum line that goes to the purge valve of the intake box, and there's another hose over here. See this hose over here? Take that off as well. Now unclip the air filter portion of the air box. Take it off. You can leave the bottom portion of it in the car. Now unclip all the wires of the coil packs, cam position sensors, camshaft oil control solenoids, and just slide it aside so you could have room to get the valve cover out. Take the coil packs out. Do the same on the opposite side. Remember to disconnect the connectors, press on it, pull on the tab, disconnect. Press, pull on the tab, disconnect. Now we're gonna need to disconnect the PCV hoses. Be careful, don't break them. Just pry the securing tabs off a little bit. Don't forget, they secured on all 4 sides. Slide her off. This one is not connected all the way. Just make some room. See, some of these harnesses are held by a zip tie with a little clip. If it looks like that, you could cut the zip tie off and replace it later on. It slides out. Just gonna make it easier for yourself to have some more room to work. See that zip tie slides out of the clip, and you can put a new one through there. Alright. Now we have some space to work. Now we're gonna clean around the valve covers and the timing chain covers, so when we take them off, nothing's gonna fall in there. I'll take the valve covers off. Just clip over here. What I usually do is I unclip the line, the hose off of it, and just twist it to the side a bit. This clip is brittle, it easily breaks though. Move the harnesses out of the way. Just remember one very important thing: when you're reinstalling the valve covers, you must replace the bolts. Bolts come with grommets. If you do not replace them, you will have oil leaking through the valve cover gaskets. So you must replace the bolts every time you take the valve covers off. Make sure not to drop anything into the motor. Try not to strip the bolts. Make sure they clean when you put in a wrench socket into it. You strip one of those bolts, it's gonna be very hard to get her out. Valve covers are off. Also, when you take the valve covers off, make sure to inspect all those rollers. I've seen on one of the cars, one of the rollers fell apart, caused all sorts of damage. So make sure to inspect all the rollers and lifters and everything in the valve train. If you see anything abnormal, you have to address that right away. Now we're gonna take the timing chain covers off. All the bolts on the timing chain covers and the valve covers are T30 Torx. So take them out. The timing chain cover is held by bolts and a silicone, so they're gonna be glued a bit. Just pry it off with a screwdriver. Make sure not to bend it, and slide it out. See, this little bracket is in the way of a timing chain cover, so you have to take it off. This is very important. There's a ground wire that goes on the oil filter housing. The ground wire is for your oil pressure switch. Older cars have one pin connector and the oil pressure switch, and they do have this wire. The newer cars will not have that wire. When you're taking the bracket off, the wire usually snaps. So pay very close attention to the ground wire when you're taking this bracket off. Otherwise you will have the oil pressure light on all the time. So if you assemble the car and you see your oil pressure light on, number one thing, check for the sensor and see if it's a 1-pin sensor or a 2-pin. If it's a 2-pin, then check your oil pressure. If it's a 1-pin, make sure that ground wire is connected. Same thing on the other side. Take the bolts out, pry the cover off. You have a little tab over here, you could pry it off on that tab and slide the cover out. You might need to play with the cover a bit to get her out, but it comes out easily. Make sure nothing falls in the timing chain compartment. Now grab a mirror and a flashlight and inspect the timing chain guides. There's a little plastic piece over there. That's a timing chain guide. You're looking for broken guides, broken or missing guides. Now this thing looks like the guides are okay. Well, this thing, it wasn't, the right side wasn't making any noise anyway, so we just took it off to check it. But we're gonna replace both tensioners anyways. Even if it's not broken, it could break anytime. Now if we look at the left side, we're missing upper guide. And the lower guide is broken as well. We got pieces of the guide laying around over there. So pretty much we found our noise source. Make sure to take all the pieces out so they don't get jammed under the timing chain, so you don't have any further problems. So you have a piece of a guide over here. Now we're gonna need to put the motor on top that center. Now the crankshaft pulley in this car does not have a center bolt, so we have this little special adapter that inserts in between the little triple square bolts that hold the crankshaft pulley, and it has a 24mm 6-point end at the other end. So this thing goes into the crank pulley so we could spin it. We need to turn the engine. You see these little flat spots on the camshafts with the threads in them? They have to be facing upwards and they have to be parallel to the head itself. So we're gonna spin the motor. We need to do like one full turn of a camshaft, so let's put it on timing marks. Very important, you must spin the engine clockwise only. Do not spin it counterclockwise. Another very important thing is, if you're spinning the motor and your tensioners are severely damaged and you feel like the motor bottomed out, kind of, it doesn't want to spin, do not force it. You might be bending your walls at that point. If you want to make it spin easier, take the spark plugs out so you don't have any compression in there. That would be the best, actually, to make sure that if you're afraid you're bottoming out or the camera, like the valves are touching the pistons, if you're not gonna have any spark plugs in there, you're not gonna have any compression, so it's not gonna give you resistance. That way you know for sure that if you're hitting something, it means you're hitting valves. Okay, now we see this thing is almost there. Now we gotta put the camshaft lock tools on it. Okay, I have this cam lock tools. They go into the threads on the camshafts to lock the camshafts in position. Again, I need to wiggle the crankshaft back and forth a little bit so they go in nice and easy. You gotta make sure when you put them in that you could thread them by hand all the way in. See if you turn the crankshaft slightly, very slightly, a couple of degrees, you'll be able to put these things in all the way by hand. Now tighten it with the wrench. Now this side is locked. Now do the other side. This thing doesn't align 100%, so we will need to use that crankshaft pin. Yeah, this thing is out. It could be due to slack on the chain because the tensioner is broken, or it could be due to skip tooth on the chain. At the end of the camshaft, the sprockets are held by a triple square bolt. When you insert the socket in it, make sure you put the socket in all the way. This bolt you do not want to strip. And the socket goes in there very tight, so make sure the socket is in all the way. Alright, so it looks like our driver's side head have skipped a tooth on the chain, so we're gonna need to lock the crankshaft, then take the sprockets off and realign the head. Okay, to get to the hole to lock the crankshaft, we're going to remove the sway bar to gain access to the opening over there. The hole is located right there on the block. I'll show it to you in a second. Lubricate the sway bar studs before you take them off in order not to break them. Just lower the sway bar a little bit, not too much. You don't have to remove it completely, just enough so you could stick your hand in between the mount and the block. The bolt located right over there, right under the, right there up top, right under the mount bracket. There's a plug on it. Break the plug loose. Stick your hand in there and take it out. Yeah. So take the plug out. This is how it looks like. Don't lose it, and make sure you put it back in and take the pin out before you try to crank the motor. Now take the pin. This is the crankshaft lock pin, and insert it in that hole. It's very tight on space in there, so you'll probably have some frustration doing that. Thread the pin in. There is a little indent on a crankshaft to the shape of the pin. So if your motor is at top dead center, the pin should go in almost all the way. Now put a wrench in the crankshaft pulley, wiggle the pulley back and forth, and tighten the lock pin up right until the point where you can't move the pulley anymore, like it doesn't budge anyways. The plug doesn't, like the pin doesn't have to be super tight. Hand tightening is okay, as long as your crankshaft cannot move in any direction, not even a bit. It's gonna move maybe a couple of thousandths of an inch. Like you could feel there's wiggling, but you can't really go anywhere. Once you're done with that, your crankshaft is at top dead center, and you're all set to take the cam sprockets off. Well, we can't get our counter holding tool to hold on to the exhaust cam, so we're gonna take the intake sprocket off first, and then it's gonna give us some slack on the chain so we could move the exhaust cam over. Once again, make sure your socket that you're inserting into the cam bolt is in very good shape, and make sure it goes in all the way. Best way to make sure of that is to grab a mirror and look inside the bolt head. Make sure there's nothing in there. Put a breaker bar on it first, and then insert the tool. So yeah, we use our pulley counter holder tool and gonna break loose the cam sprocket. You gotta be very careful not to damage the chain or the valves. Yep, we got it loose. I'm gonna take the bolt out, take the cam sprocket off, so let some slack on the chain so we could counter hold the other pulley, the other sprocket. Carefully slide it off the camshaft. Yep, we got her off. Now we can put our tool, the cam lock tool, onto the camshafts and make it tight. You might need to twist the camshaft just a bit so it aligns better with the hole in the camshaft lock tool. These bolts, they're supposed to go in by hand. If you're having a problem with it going in by hand, your camshaft probably is not aligned properly. So make sure they go in by hand. So if your bolt doesn't want to go in by hand or goes in kind of hard, make sure your threads are clean, make sure the bolt is clean. You do not want to damage the threads in the camshaft. You may have a big problem. Tighten up the lock plate and loosen the other cam sprocket. Once again, make sure the socket goes in into the bolt all the way. Counter hole too. Break the bolt loose, and you're all set to take the sprocket off. Yep. Now don't try to put the chain on one side of the tensioner. Leave it guided as it should be when it's installed, all around the tensioner. Otherwise you might have a problem with taking the tensioner out of the head. And take the T30 Turks bolts out of the tensioner. So yeah, look at the tensioner, find all the bolts on it. And get them out. You may want to use a mirror to see where the bolts are. Make sure the bolts are clean so you don't strip them. And the main part is make sure you do not drop it into an engine. So use a magnet or something to get the bolts out. if you're working in this kind of areas and you drop a bolt or anything, for matter of fact, make sure you find it before you assemble the car back. Don't assume it did not fall into the engine, because it usually does fall into the engine. And then you see something similar to those videos destroyed in seconds. One of the bolts is kind of tight to get to. The guide rail is right in the way of the bolt. You gotta use a long reach T30 socket to get to it where it is possible. Check to make sure you have no more bolts in the tensioner. And it looks like we don't. You could slide the tensioner out through the chain. As you see, we're missing all the guides now. Some pieces are still on it, but most of the guides are missing. Now make sure you check the whole area very thoroughly. See, this guide got stuck under the chain, and that's not good. That's why I skipped teeth. You gotta take every single piece of the guide out of there. Otherwise, you could stuck under the chain again. It could get stuck under the chain and rip the chain. See, we got pieces of the guide down there. Down by in the middle. Maybe use long reach nose pliers to get those pieces out, but you must take them all out. Yep. See, they all got stuck under a chain. Inspect the whole area very carefully. You must make sure there is absolutely no pieces of guides left anywhere. You gotta take the gasket out. See this black thing? It's a gasket from the tensioner. You gotta get that thing off. Kind of under. Yep. Clean the sealing surfaces really good. You gotta clean all that brown stuff from under the gasket out. Alright, now we're ready to put the tensioner back in. Alright, we got our new tensioners. They come with gaskets pre-installed, so so you don't have to worry about it. Maybe put some high-tech gasket sealer in it. Do not put anything like silicone or any of that kind of stuff. That's about it. Let's put them in. The tensioners are different left and right, so make sure you pick the right one, so you don't sit there and trying to stick the wrong part into the head. When you put in the tensioner in, make sure you do not scratch the gasket, or you may have leakage after that, and that will be bad. It's not going to be leaking outside, it's going to be leaking pressure of a tensioner, and that's not going to be pleasant to fix. Yep, so nice and easy. Slide the tensioner in, put the chain in the camshafts and the tensioner guides. Now put the bolts in. There's 6 bolts on the tensioner, so make sure you put all 6 in. Don't tighten them at first, put them in by hand. Make sure you clean the heads really good. Use a mirror to align yourself. Make sure you don't drop them into the engine. They will suck if you drop it into the engine. Then you may need to take the engine out. So be very careful. Take your time. Do it right the first time. Pay attention to every little detail. Never put the bolt in and just let it sit there. Always hold it by your finger so it doesn't fall out. Just make sure you put all the bolts in. Count them when you take them out. Make sure you count them when you put them in. There is no extra bolts. Maybe the most annoying one. Okay. When you have all the bolts in, and you could tighten the tensioner down. Now, always replace the bolts for the camshaft. Put a little bit of a thread lock on them, just in case. And grab the camshaft sprockets. It's easy to tell which one it is. The one with the spring is the exhaust one. Put the chain onto the camshaft sprocket gear and put the sprocket onto the camshaft. Now put the bolt in, do not tighten it. Just thread her in all the way by hand. Make sure the cam sprocket could be turned freely. You're gonna need to pre-tension the chain before tightening the bolts. So just hand tighten it. See, I could still spin the sprocket. Now put the other sprocket on, same way. Make sure your chain didn't get caught on anything. Put the other bolt in. Same thing. Hand tighten it so the sprockets could be turned when you pre-tension the chain. Now you're gonna need to pull the pin out of the tensioner. So tightens up the chain. Now we're gonna need our counter holder tool. And pre-tighten the chain even more. You don't need to go crazy on it. Just tighten it so it doesn't have any slack. Bottoms out, that's it. That's enough. Make sure your engine is locked so it doesn't mess up your timing. Put a torque wrench onto the socket. We're gonna need to pre-tighten it at 30 foot-pounds while still holding the chain tight. Okay. Now do the same thing to the other cam. While still keeping tension on the chain. Okay. Now the second step is going to be 60 foot-pounds. At that point, the chain is pre-tightened already. So you need to hold the camshaft in order not to break it. It's pretty easy to break these bolts off. At the torque we're going to be tightening the cam sprockets at. So you need to hold the cam sprocket still. Okay. Okay. And now the last step, you need to turn that bolt another 90 degrees. Always back your torque wrench back to 0. that would be the hardest step. Make sure you get comfortable with it. Make sure you back the wrench enough for you to make that 90-degree. There you go. The left side is done. Now we're gonna do the right side. The right side has a little bit more space on it, so it'll be just a bit easier. We got the same thing. We're gonna take the cam sprockets off, get the tensioner out, and replace it. See, we got exactly the same procedure. Make sure the socket is in all the way. Use the counter holder tool. Break the bolts loose. Make sure you are counter holding the cam sprockets, because it's very easy to break the camshafts if you're not. These bolts are tight, so make sure you are counter holding them. So take the bolts out, the cam sprockets. Slide the cam sprockets off. Take him out. Now put the chain back into the tensioner so it doesn't get stuck anywhere. So you can easily take the tensioner out and take the bolts out of the tensioner. Once again, make sure the bolts are clean and your bit goes in all the way. Believe me, you do not want to strip these bolts while they're in the engine. We got 6 bolts out. Let's slide the tensioner out now. Yep. Here you go. We got our tensioner out. Look at that, how much sludge is in there. Look at this. Okay. Take the gasket out. I'll clean the surface. Put the new tensioner in. Inspect everything in the timing chain compartment. Make sure there's nothing laying around. So just like the other side, put the chain on the camshafts. Clean the sealing surfaces of the where the gasket goes. Make sure all the oil channels are clean. It's time to put the tensioner back in. A little bit of a gasket sealer. Make sure the gasket stays in place. Make sure not to scratch it. Yep, the tensioner is in. Align the tensioner to mounting holes. And put the bolts in. Remember, there's 6 bolts. Make sure you put all 6 bolts back in, just like the other side. Do not tighten it all the way. Make sure they are all in first, so you don't have a problem with the bolt holes aligning. If you tighten one bolt and it's not, the rest might not align properly. So just put the bolts in by hand. Make sure they are all in before you tighten it. Make sure not to drop it into the engine. This one upper bolt you might need to, you will need to slide the chain off the tensioner to put this bolt in. Tighten them all up. They need to be tightened 7 foot-pounds. Alright, now we're gonna install the cam gears. Be very careful. Remember, the one with the spring goes on the exhaust. Put her in with the fact in mind that you're gonna need to put your counter holder tool in there, so make sure it's comfortable enough. Remember, the first step, pre-tightening, you need to pull over on the chain, put a little bit of thread sealer on the bolts. Put the bolts in by hand. Do not tighten them. You're going to need to load the chain first. .30 foot-pounds. Alright, you gotta hold up the chain. Tighten the sprockets. Now the next step is 60 foot-pounds. Now you gotta hold the camshaft, cam sprocket, so you don't break it. And now we gotta do the 90 degrees. That's it. Now we can assemble it. Take the cam wax off. Now bring the car up to take the crankshaft pin out. Okay, take the crank pin out. You're gonna need to wiggle the crankshaft just a bit to do that. And you need to do 2 turns of a crankshaft and then install all the timing lock plates and a pin back into the car to make sure you are right on time and there's no problems. Take all the spark plugs out so you don't have any compression, so you don't have any resistance in the motor, and you could feel easily if you hitting something with your pistons. Okay, now put the cam locks back in. And put the crank lock back in. Now we're done with the assembling the timing chains. Check the timing, everything is good. If you did the two turns of a crankshaft and all your cam locks and crankshaft lock went in perfectly, you're all set. You could assemble the covers back on and put the valve covers on. Now clean the covers, the timing chain covers. There's a little groove in the cover. Make sure you're cleaning all the silicone out of the groove. Put new silicone on it. We use this Mercedes silicone. It's really good. Make sure not to put too much of it. You don't want to go into your engine and then clogging your oil ports. Carefully slide the cover in. Be careful, don't try not to take any of the silicone off of it, because it might start leaking. The covers are not interchangeable, so make sure you're putting the right cover on so you don't waste your time and make everything dirty with silicone. Covers have this little wire brackets, and there's each one on each side, so don't forget to put that in. Put all the bolts in by hand first, don't tighten them. So, if you need to realign the cover, you could. The main problem with this job is half of the bolts you have to do by just feeling the holes. You can't really see anything there. So make sure they all tight and they all there. Double check the tightness of the bolts by hand. That's it, one cover is on. Let's do the other side. Now let's install the other side cover. Same thing, try not to get any of the silicone of the sealing surface. Turn around. Put all the bolts in by hand. The left side is a little tight on space, so take your time. Be careful, don't break anything. Every little plastic piece in this car is pretty expensive. Alright, now we could reinstall the valve covers. Now, there's a little wire bracket behind this cover over there. I took it off to gain access to one of the bolts. We have to reinstall that before we continue. Now it's mounted by a little stud. This is the stud that I was talking about with the ground wire for the oil pressure sensor. Let's put that in. Alright, now take it. There's the ground wires. There are two. That's that. Put the other wire bracket on top of it. Put the nut on. And tighten it. Make sure you have good ground connection there. Take a mirror and make sure you tighten it properly. Now connect the sensors and you're all set in the back. That's it. Now we can put the valve covers back on. Now clean the sealing surfaces of the head. If you're cleaning like I'm cleaning right now, you must do an oil change after you're done to flush out all the cleaning solutions out of the motor. Make sure the sealing surfaces are dry and free of grease. So we got our valve covers cleaned up. When installing new valve cover gaskets, make sure to always replace the valve cover bolts. These bolts are pretty expensive, around $5 each, but they come with grommets. If you don't replace these bolts, your valve covers will be leaking. So now install the new valve cover gasket. Put a little bit of a high-tech gasket sealer on it, just to make sure it sticks better. And put the bolts through it. Alright. Put the valve cover in. Make sure your gasket doesn't come out in the whole valve cover. we're all good. Now do the other side. Same thing. Put the valve cover, gasket onto the valve cover, put the bolts through it. Okay, make sure the gasket is in everywhere. Before bolting the gasket, the valve covers down, make sure the gasket didn't twist anywhere and it's still laying flat on the head. The gasket is sitting good. Now thread the bolts in, don't tighten them. Now torque it down. Alright, now do the other side. Alright, now we could connect all the hoses back on and wiring harnesses. Make sure you clip everything in all the way. Put the coil packs in. Make sure you didn't forget to put the spark plugs in too. Align the wiring harness to all the coils at the same time. Pop the coils in and connect the wires. Alright, now connect all the wiring back up. Now, these two wires, they could be misplaced. So, this cam position sensor has a little clip that goes into here. Make sure you don't be mistaken. So we've got a broken vacuum line over here that we're gonna need to fix. Okay, now we're gonna replace the oil filter. Secure the wire harnesses. Check everything you touched in this place. Now we could put the airbox back in. Alright. Okay, now put the intake hose back on. Be careful. Make sure it went onto the throttle body properly. Because I've seen a lot of times it would kink up on the bottom of the throttle body and wouldn't go on the throttle body like it should go on. Tighten the clamps up. Clip in the purge valve hose and this vacuum hose back on. Now we're gonna put the coolant tank back in. It's very important. There's a little grommet that's supposed to be there at the bottom of the tank where this pin goes into. If it's not there, the tank will be wobbling around. Don't forget to connect it. Just slide the grommet in. That's it. And put the screw back in. We got the car back up on the lift. We need to take the crank locating thing out. Yep. And close up that opening. Make sure you do that before you crank the car, if you will crank it with any of the camshaft or crankshaft vacating plates and pins, you will damage the motor. So before you try to start it, make sure all that stuff is out. Now we got our plug for the crankshaft vacating hole. It's kind of pain to put it in there, but it's very doable. Yep. Bolt it in there. It's a 6mm hex. Tighten it up, make sure it's nice and tight, otherwise you will be spilling oil like no tomorrow. Make sure you don't have your wrench in the crankshaft pulley. Now put the sway bar back on. Drain the oil. Replace the drain plug. Should always use a new plug, or at least change the crash washer. That's it. Put the oil in, try to start it. This thing takes almost 6.5 quarts. Pull the dipstick out so oil drains faster if you're using a funnel. Alright, now double and triple check that you don't have any wrenches on the crank pulley. All your cam locating, crank locating tools are off the car. You didn't forget to bolt anything down. Check to make sure you didn't have any extra bolts left or extra parts. And now you could try to start it. Sounds good. Now we can shut it off and check the oil level. Looks like we are all set. And that's it. We're all set. Check and clear the error codes. Make sure they don't come back. And you're good to go.